Okay, I need you to understand something before we go any further. There's a name you need to know. A name that's been whispered in the corridors of power. A name that connects Moscow to Manhattan. A name that bridges the world of Russian oligarchs and American politics. That name is Leonard Blavatnik, and what he did with $1 million changed the trajectory of how we understand money, power, and influence in modern American politics. Picture this. It's January 2017. Washington is buzzing with inauguration preparations. The city is transforming into a stage for the peaceful transfer of power, something America has done for over 2 centuries. But underneath all that pageantry, underneath the balls and the ceremonies and the speeches, money is flowing. Not just any money, Russian-connected money. And it's flowing directly into the heart of the Trump administration's first moment in power. $1 million. That's what Leonard Blavatnik's company, Access Industries, donated to Donald Trump's presidential inaugural committee. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so what? Rich people donate to inaugurations all the time. That's true. But here's the thing that makes this different, that makes this matter in ways most people don't fully grasp. Blavatnik isn't just any billionaire. He's a Ukrainian-born British-American citizen who made his fortune in Russia during the chaotic years after the Soviet Union collapsed. And his business partner, his close associate, the man he's worked with for decades, is Viktor Vekselberg, one of the most powerful oligarchs in Putin's inner circle. Let me take you back to understand how we got here, because this story doesn't start with $1 million check. It starts in the rubble of the Soviet Union, in the wild, lawless frontier of post-communist Russia, where a small group of men positioned themselves to become unimaginably wealthy. Blavatnik was born in Odessa, Ukraine in 1957. He studied at Moscow State University before emigrating to the United States in 1978, right in the middle of the Cold War. He became a naturalized American citizen. He went to Harvard Business School. By all outward appearances, he was living the American dream. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Blavatnik saw an opportunity that most people couldn't even comprehend. He went back to Russia. What happened in Russia in the 1990s was one of the most dramatic transfers of wealth in human history. State-owned industries, oil companies, aluminium factories, natural gas operations that had belonged to the Soviet government were suddenly up for grabs. And the men who had the right connections, who knew the right people, who understood how to navigate the chaos, became billionaires almost overnight. Blavatnik was one of those men. He partnered with Viktor Vekselberg and another oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, to create some of the most powerful energy and industrial conglomerates in Russia. Together, they controlled massive portions of Russia's aluminium industry through a company called Rusal. They had their hands in oil, in natural gas, in minerals. And crucially, they maintained close relationships with Vladimir Putin and the emerging Russian government. Because in Russia, you don't become a billionaire without Putin's blessing. That's not how it works. The oligarchs and the Kremlin operate in a symbiotic relationship. The oligarchs get rich, the Kremlin gets control, and everyone understands the rules. Now, Blavatnik is smart. He's extremely smart. He understood early on that diversification wasn't just good business, it was survival. He took his Russian fortune and spread it across the globe. He bought Warner Music Group for $3.3 billion in 2011. He invested in chemicals, in real estate, in entertainment. He donated massive sums to universities. Oxford has a school named after him, the Blavatnik School of Government, funded by a £75 million donation. He's given money to Tate Modern, to the Victoria and Albert Museum. He cultivated an image not as a Russian oligarch, but as a Western philanthropist, a cultured businessman, a friend to the arts and education. But underneath all of that, the Russian connections remained. And those connections matter. They matter because Viktor Vekselberg, Blavatnik's longtime business partner and associate, is not just any Russian billionaire. Vekselberg is sanctioned by the United States Treasury Department. He's been identified as part of Vladimir Putin's inner circle, someone who profits from Russia's corrupt system. someone who advances Russia's malign activities around the world. And Blavatnik has worked with this man for decades. Now let's fast forward to 2016. Donald Trump is running for president, and something interesting starts to happen with Blavatnik's political donations. For years, Blavatnik had given relatively modest amounts to both Democrats and Republicans, spreading his money around, staying bipartisan, playing it safe. His donations typically totaled around $300,000 per election cycle, scattered across 30 to 40 candidates from both parties. Standard operating procedure for a wealthy businessman hedging his bets. But in 2015 and 2016, that pattern changed dramatically. Blavatnik suddenly became one of the biggest donors to the Republican Party, pouring more than $7 million into Republican causes. He gave $1.5 million to support Marco Rubio. He gave $1 million to support Scott Walker. He gave money to Lindsey Graham, to John McCain, to the Republican National Committee. And interestingly, in February 2016, he gave over $1 million to an anti-Trump Republican group. He was backing everyone except Trump in the Republican primary. But then Trump won the nomination, and then Trump won the election, and suddenly everything changed. In December 2016, Access Industries, Blavatnik's company, wrote a check for $1 million to Donald Trump's presidential inaugural committee. $1 million. Let that number sink in for a moment, because that $1 million bought something. It bought access. It bought seats at the exclusive candlelight dinner. It bought proximity to power at the exact moment when a new administration was forming, when positions were being filled, when relationships were being established. And here's where the story gets even more interesting, where the web of connections becomes impossible to ignore. Viktor Vekselberg, the sanctioned Russian oligarch and Blavatnik's business partner, attended Trump's inauguration. He was there, in Washington, at the ceremonies, at the private events. And according to multiple reports, he sat at a table paid for by Blavatnik's donation. A Russian oligarch who can't legally donate to American political campaigns because he's not a US citizen, sitting at Trump's inauguration, courtesy of his American business partner's $1 million contribution. But it doesn't stop there. Vekselberg's cousin Andrew Intrater, who runs Columbus Nova, the American investment arm of Vekselberg's Russian conglomerate Renova Group, also donated to the inauguration. He gave $250,000. And just 11 days before Trump's inauguration, Vekselberg met with Michael Cohen, Trump's personal attorney and fixer, at Trump Tower in New York. An impromptu meeting arranged by Intrater, the details of which remain murky to this day. And then, in January 2017, right after Trump was sworn in, Columbus Nova, Intrater's company, began making payments to Michael Cohen's shell company, Essential Consultants LLC. The same shell company Cohen had used to pay off Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet about an alleged affair with Trump. Over the next 8 months, Columbus Nova paid Cohen $500,000. $500,000 for what Columbus Nova claimed was consulting on real estate and potential investments. $500,000 that raised immediate red flags when it was discovered. Think about the timing here. Think about what's happening. A Russian oligarch attends Trump's inauguration, courtesy of $1 million donation from his business partner. Then, that oligarch's American cousin starts funneling money to Trump's personal lawyer, supposedly for consulting services. All of this happening in the opening months of the Trump presidency, as Russia is actively being investigated for interfering in the 2016 election. Special Counsel Robert Mueller certainly found it interesting. Mueller's team questioned Vekselberg at a New York airport, searching his electronic devices, asking about the payments to Cohen, asking about the inauguration, asking about the connections. Mueller's investigators subpoenaed the inaugural committee, looking into whether illegal donations from foreign nationals had been accepted. Because while Blavatnik is a US citizen and can legally donate to American political campaigns, the question becomes more complex when those donations appear to benefit foreign nationals who cannot. Now, let's talk about what this money actually bought. Because it wasn't just about attending fancy dinners or getting a photo with the president. two senior Trump administration officials, Makan Delrahim and David Bernhardt, were former lobbyists for Access Industries, Blavatnik's company. Delrahim became the Assistant Attorney General for the Antitrust Division. Bernhardt became Deputy Secretary of the Interior. Both men had registered as lobbyists for Access Industries before joining the Trump administration. Both men had to navigate questions about potential conflicts of interest, about whether their past work for a company with deep Russian ties should have disqualified them from positions of power. And here's something most people don't know, something that got lost in all the other Trump administration scandals. When David Bernhardt was being vetted for his position, his lobbying records were quietly amended. Records that had initially shown him lobbying for Access Industries were changed to say he had never actually engaged in lobbying activities for the company. The timing of these changes is remarkable. They happened just as Blavatnik's $1 million donation to Trump's inauguration became public knowledge, just as questions were being raised about Russian-connected money flowing into American politics. Why would lobbying records be changed? Why would there be this sudden need to distance Bernhardt from Access Industries right at the moment when Blavatnik was becoming a political liability? These are questions that deserve answers. Questions that point to a larger pattern of influence and access that money can buy in American politics. Let's step back and look at the broader picture here, because this isn't just about one donation or one oligarch or one set of connections. This is about how foreign money, Russian money specifically, found pathways into American political power at the highest levels. The Center for Responsive Politics, which tracks political donations and influence, found that multiple Russian-connected donors began giving unprecedented amounts of money to Trump-affiliated groups right as he secured the Republican nomination. Simon Kooks, a Russian-born American oil executive who had previously given minimal political donations, suddenly donated $280,000 to Trump victory funds. He sent emails to Russian officials boasting about his involvement in Trump's campaign, saying he was actively involved in Trump's election campaign and was part of the group on strategy development. He even requested face-to-face meetings with high-ranking Russian officials during the campaign, sharing photos of himself with Rudy Giuliani and writing that he thought Trump's chances of winning were very good. All three men, Blavatnik, Kooks and Intretta, had worked closely with Viktor Vekselberg. All three had ties to Russian energy and industrial interests. And all three started pouring unprecedented amounts of money into Republican coffers and Trump-affiliated groups at exactly the same time. The pattern is unmistakable. Russian-connected money flowing into American politics through American citizens who maintained close business relationships with sanctioned Russian oligarchs. Now, here's what makes this so difficult to prosecute, so hard to stop, and so important to understand. Everything Blavatnik did was technically legal. He's a US citizen. He has every legal right to donate to political campaigns and causes. The money came from his American company, Access Industries, not directly from Russian sources. On paper, everything looks clean. But the reality is far more complicated. Experts who study Russian influence and oligarch behaviour don't believe these donations happened in a vacuum. Louise Shelley, director of the Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Centre at George Mason University, told investigators she doesn't believe large contributions from Blavatnik or donors associated with Vekselberg would occur without implicit Kremlin approval. Because that's how the system works in Russia. The oligarchs don't act independently. They're part of an ecosystem where business and state power are inseparable. The US Treasury Department, when it sanctioned Vekselberg and other oligarchs in April 2018, was explicit about this relationship. They wrote that the Russian government operates for the disproportionate benefit of oligarchs and government elites, and that these individuals profit from this corrupt system. The sanctions weren't just about individual bad actors. They were about recognising that these oligarchs are instruments of Russian state power, that their wealth and their influence serve Putin's interests. And when you understand that context, when you see how tightly woven together the Russian oligarchy and the Kremlin are, Blavatnik's $1 million donation takes on a different meaning. It's not just a wealthy businessman supporting a political candidate. It's a node in a network of influence that connects Moscow to Washington, that gives Russian-connected interests a seat at the table when power is being consolidated, when policy is being shaped, when access is being granted. The Trump administration initially downplayed these connections, insisted that the campaign had no knowledge of any improper donations, maintained that everything was above board. And technically, legally, they might be right. The campaign didn't receive money directly from Blavatnik during the election. The donations went to the Republican National Committee, to various political action committees, to the inaugural fund. But the effect was the same. Money flowed from someone with deep Russian business ties into the Republican political ecosystem at exactly the moment Trump was rising to power. And the aftermath of these revelations has been significant. When Bo Rothstein, a professor at Oxford's Blavatnik School of Government, learned about the $1 million donation to Trump's inauguration, he resigned in protest, calling it incomprehensible and irresponsible. He couldn't reconcile working at an institution named after someone who had funded Trump's rise to power. The Hudson Institute accepted a donation from Blavatnik in December 2018, then returned it after outcry from anti-corruption voices. Institutions that had once welcomed Blavatnik's money began to distance themselves as the Russian connections became impossible to ignore. MIT removed Vekselberg from its board of trustees after he was sanctioned. The prestigious university, which had worked closely with Vekselberg's Skolkovo Foundation, Russia's answer to Silicon Valley, severed ties completely. The American political establishment began to recognize that Russian-connected money, even when filtered through legal channels, even when coming from American citizens, carried risks that outweighed the benefits. But here's what's crucial to understand. The damage was already done. The connections were already made. The access was already granted. By the time these revelations became public, Trump had already been inaugurated. His administration had already been staffed. Relationships had already been formed. And the $1 million Blavatnik spent helped make that happen. Think about what $1 million buys in American politics. It buys FaceTime with the president. It buys seats at private dinners. It buys the ability to whisper in powerful ears at moments when decisions are being made. It buys the presumption of being a friend, an ally, someone whose calls get returned, whose concerns get heard. For Russian-connected interests looking to influence American policy, looking to soften sanctions, looking to maintain business relationships despite geopolitical tensions, that access is priceless. And the returns on that investment are measurable. Despite all the rhetoric about being tough on Russia, despite the investigations and the headlines and the scandal, Russian oligarchs maintained their wealth, maintained their global business operations, maintained their positions of power. Some sanctions were imposed, yes, but they were often negotiated, reduced, or worked around. The fundamental system that allows this kind of influence to operate remained intact. Federal prosecutors eventually brought charges against others who tried to funnel Russian money into American politics. Jesse Benton, a Republican operative, was sentenced to 18 months in prison for conspiring to illegally funnel contributions from a Russian national to Trump's 2016 campaign. He helped orchestrate a scheme where a Russian named Roman Vasilenko paid $100,000 to attend a Trump fundraiser without revealing his nationality to the campaign. Benton created a fake invoice, kept $75,000 for himself, and used the remaining $25,000 to contribute to the campaign. Russian oligarch Andrei Muravyev was indicted for wiring $1 million to Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, the Soviet-born associates of Rudy Giuliani, to fund political contributions. That money ended up flowing to Republican candidates and committees, including more than $150,000 to Republican Adam Laxalt in Nevada, and $325,000 to a Trump super PAC. It is illegal for foreign nationals to make political donations in the US, and prosecutors worked hard to expose these schemes. But Blavatnik's donation was different. It was legal. It was disclosed. It went through proper channels. And that's exactly what makes it so insidious, so difficult to address, so important to understand. The most effective influence doesn't break the law. It exploits the gaps in the law, the ambiguities, the grey areas, where money and power intersect in ways that are perfectly legal, but fundamentally corrupt. American campaign finance law says foreign nationals can't donate to political campaigns. But it doesn't say American citizens can't donate, even if they made their fortune in Russia, even if they maintain close business relationships with sanctioned oligarchs, even if their donations clearly benefit foreign interests. That's the loophole. That's the vulnerability. And Russia exploited it brilliantly. So where does this leave us? What does it mean for American democracy when foreign-connected money can flow so easily into our political system? When $1 million donation from someone with deep Russian ties can buy access to a presidential inauguration? When that donation can help place lobbyists for Russian-connected companies into senior government positions? When the entire system operates in ways that are technically legal, but fundamentally undermine the independence of American political institutions? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're the questions we need to be asking as we watch money continue to flow, as influence continues to be bought and sold, as the line between American interests and foreign interests becomes increasingly blurred. Because Leonard Blavatnik's $1 million donation isn't an outlier. It's a template. It's a demonstration of how the system works, how wealth generated in corrupt systems abroad can be laundered through Western institutions and then deployed to shape Western politics. The Special Counsel investigation ended. Some people were charged, some people went to prison. But the fundamental mechanisms that allowed Russian-connected money to flow into American politics remain largely intact. We've identified the problem, we've documented it, we've traced the money. But we haven't fixed it. We haven't closed the loopholes. We haven't built the barriers that would prevent this from happening again. And make no mistake, it is happening again. Right now. In different forms, through different channels, with different players. But the fundamental game remains the same. Foreign interests looking to influence American policy identify American citizens with connections to their countries. They build business relationships. They create partnerships. And then those American citizens deploy their wealth into the American political system in ways that advance foreign interests while remaining perfectly legal. Blavatnik continues to be one of the wealthiest people in Britain. Access Industries continues to operate globally. The Russian connections remain, even as they've become more carefully managed, more discreetly handled, more insulated from public scrutiny. The $1 million spent on Trump's inauguration is now a footnote, a line item in the vast catalogue of Trump-Russia connections that dominated headlines for years. But it shouldn't be forgotten. It should be studied. It should be understood as a case study in how modern corruption operates, how influence is bought, how foreign interests penetrate American political power, not through crude bribery or obvious illegality, but through the sophisticated deployment of legal donations, through the cultivation of relationships, through the patient construction of networks that blur the line between business and politics, between American interests and foreign interests, between legitimate political participation and something far more troubling. The story of Leonard Blavatnik's $1 million donation is a story about money and power in the 21st century. It's a story about how globalization creates opportunities for influence that cross borders and transcend traditional notions of sovereignty. It's a story about how the legal system struggles to keep pace with the sophisticated mechanisms of modern corruption. And it's a story that's still being written, because the forces that brought us here, the incentives that drive this behaviour, the systems that enable it, they're all still operating. If this deep dive helped you understand not just what happened, but why it matters, not just the surface scandal, but the underlying mechanisms of influence and power, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Because this is the kind of story that doesn't get told enough. The kind of analysis that connects the dots between individual events and larger patterns, between single donations and systemic vulnerabilities. And in the comments, I want to know what you think. Are the current campaign finance laws sufficient to prevent foreign influence? Or do we need fundamental reform to protect American democracy from sophisticated influence operations that operate entirely within the letter of the law? Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next one.